A warehouse fire in Midtown ignites more than smoke. It uncovers secrets some would kill to protect. Join Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin as they navigate political shadows, vanished strategists, and deadly whispers. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? Subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Nero Wolfe and the day Brownstone burned down. The scream of the fire engine tore me out of bed before my socks had decided which feet they belonged on. That sound could peel varnish off a violin, and at that hour, whatever hour it was, I didn't have the moral stamina to pretend it was anything but an omen. West 35th Street had its share of night owls, but none that howled quite so insistently. I yanked on trousers, misbuttoned a shirt, and hustled downstairs, wondering whether I'd need to retrieve Wolfe from the plant rooms or negotiate with the universe for 5 more minutes of peace. Neither seemed likely. By the time I reached the front stoop, the street looked like someone had taken a match to a theatre backdrop titled Urban Chaos at Dawn. A warehouse 2 buildings down was going up hard and fast, flames licking the sky like they had a grudge. Orange lights splashed across windows, brick, and the polished hood of a heron coupe that would not forgive me if it blistered. Firefighters shouted orders over the clang of hydrant keys. A hose whipped around like a snake with social ambitions. Smoke poured upward in a dark ribbon, catching lamplight and making the whole block look like a noir film clogged with too much budget for special effects. Someone yelled, "The Brownstone's catching," which I took as a personal insult. "No, it's not," I barked back, because if anyone was going to declare Nero Wolfe's brownstone burning, it sure as hell wasn't going to be a guy whose helmet sat crooked. I stepped farther onto the stoop, partly to assess the danger, partly to make sure the rumour died a swift, honourable death. The brownstone stood unchanged, solid, smug, and absolutely uncharred, its silhouette distorted only because the firelight painted tricks on its trim. But firemen don't trust illusions, so 2 of them ran toward our place like they intended to spray first and apologize later. I headed down the steps to intercept before they brained the office windows with a hose coupling. "Easy," I said. "You're misreading the skyline." "We got a report. Unreport it. Wolfe's place doesn't burn, it sulks." They stared at me like I had invented fire for recreational purposes, but they veered off toward the warehouse. That was a relief. Explaining water damage to Wolfe makes explaining murder look like kindergarten arithmetic. Behind me, the elevator clattered faintly, which meant Wolfe had abandoned his orchids before 11. That alone could have been the headline in the New York Gazette. "Genius Detective Interrupts Floral Ritual. City Demands Reason." He emerged from the doorway in a yellow silk robe, jaw set, eyes narrowed, posture stiff as a judge with gout. "Archie," he said, voice crisp, "what is the meaning of this infernal clamour?" "A warehouse fire," I told him, 2 doors down. Your property's fine. No need to sue the fire department yet." He surveyed the scene with the measured distaste of a man forced to witness someone fold a napkin incorrectly. Flames leapt in jagged waves, throwing shadows that stretched across the brownstone facade like hands trying to grab purchase. He sniffed the air. Wolfe's olfactory powers rivaled his logic. If the smoke had contained traces of oregano, he'd have told you the crop field in Sicily by acreage. "An arson," he muttered, tone loaded with a weight I recognized. Wolfe may not have been clairvoyant, but after decades of deciphering the idiocy of humanity, he could predict trouble the way meteorologists predict rain, by the ache in their teeth. Kramer arrived then, stepping out of his sedan with the grim resolve of a man who hadn't slept, eaten, or enjoyed a cigar since Roosevelt's 3rd term. Smoke curled around him like he'd brought his own supply. His coat smelled like fire, and his face carried that tired set I only saw when he knew a simple call had become a procedural migraine. "Goodwin," he grunted by way of greeting. His eyes slid to Wolfe. "I see the commotion woke you." "I am awake, Inspector, but certainly not enlightened," Wolfe answered. "Explain." Kramer jabbed his cigar toward the inferno. "Warehouse top floor is leased to a political consulting outfit. 5 desks, 3 typewriters, and enough confidential memos to stock a congressional hearing. Fire didn't start in the utility room. It started in a filing cabinet." "Political strategists," Wolfe said, his lip curling faintly. "Parasites who gorge upon the sincerity of the electorate." "Whatever they are, One of them's missing. Kramer gestured at a charred shape lying near a hydrant. Firefighters had dragged it from the sidewalk. Found this tossed during evacuation. I walked over with him. The shape resolved into a half-burned leather briefcase. Smoke curled from its seams. When I touched the clasp, it crumbled in my fingers like a burnt cookie. Inside, ruined papers, melted pen, and a single metal label somehow spared the worst. Nameplate, Julius Fenn. If Manhattan had a prize for most unloved consultant, Fenn would have been defending champ for 3 years running. He built campaigns the way bomb makers build clocks, delicate, explosive, and guaranteed to ruin someone's future. Last I'd heard, he'd been accused of blackmailing 2 committee chairs and leaking polling data like a lawn sprinkler. Kramer rubbed his temple. We don't know whether he was inside when it went up. No body yet. I held up the briefcase. Your evidence, Inspector. Purely temporary contact from me. I didn't smudge it with milk or jam. Don't get cute, he said, taking it with a gloved hand. And this isn't a joke. Half the block heard the guy yelling about being targeted last week. Wolfe descended 1 step, an event as rare as a solar eclipse you could time by the second. Inspector, if your business is here, proceed, but I dislike my tranquility disrupted. This is a public nuisance. Kramer snorted softly. That's New York for you. Flames don't schedule appointments. I could have sworn Wolfe's eyebrow twitched at that, but he stayed silent. The wind pushed a cloud of smoke across us. My eyes watered, and Wolfe retreated half a step, nose wrinkling like someone had just simmered garlic incorrectly. A firefighter jogged up. Report said this building was catching. False alarm? Yes, I snapped. Please tell dispatch to stop wishing disaster on our residents. He hesitated. Hard to tell with the shadows. Thought we saw flames on your roofline. I pointed at the warehouse. Those are the flames. Over there. Focus accordingly. He shrugged and left. Wolfe turned his head just enough to give me that sideways glance reserved for when my performance meets his approval, but he refuses to acknowledge it in public. Archie, he said, you are loitering in the smoke like a sausage. Just keeping your house from being doused, I told him. A full soaking would do dreadful things to Fritz's morale. As would your demise, Wolfe said evenly, the protectiveness slipping through before he caught it. Get inside. I require information without inhaling soot. But before we could retreat, a reporter from the Gazette materialized, notebook in hand. Is it true Wolfe's Brownstone almost burned? He asked. No, I replied. But if you print that, I'll donate your typewriter to the Smithsonian as a relic of careless journalism. He scribbled anyway. Red herring number 1 for the day. The story he'd produce undoubtedly claimed we staged the blaze for publicity. Kramer exhaled, weary. Wolfe, if this turns out to be political sabotage, I may have to come back later to ask about Fenn's dealings. He's tangled up with people who don't leave clean trails. I am not engaged by Mr. Fenn, Wolfe said, and unless compelled by subpoena, I shall preserve my tranquility. Kramer adjusted his coat. I'll let you know what we find. Try not to obstruct anything. That depends, Wolfe murmured, on what you choose to call obstruction. They shared a look, mutual exasperation wrapped in professional respect. Kramer nodded once, curt but sincere. All right, Wolfe, I'll wait for your report, if there is one. With that, he strode back toward the fire line, leaving Wolfe and me alone on the stoop. The flames roared, firefighters shouted, and the air tasted like charcoal ambition. Archie, Wolfe said, already turning, inside. Yes, sir. As we stepped back through the door, the fire's glow painted one last flicker across the office windows. For a second, the brownstone looked like it was absorbing the flames. Not threatened, just watching. I didn't like the symbolism, and judging by the crease at the corner of Wolfe's mouth, neither did he. Lock up, Wolfe said, pulling the door shut with finality. I will require a report, and perhaps, he paused, perhaps we shall prepare for inquiries. Inquiries about what? About the day, he said. The brownstone nearly burned down. It was a metaphor, not a fact, but Manhattan loves the difference to be fuzzy, and that, I suspected, was only the beginning. Smoggy grey light squeezed through the blinds the next morning like it had paid rent and expected us to thank it for showing up. The smell of damp ash still clung to the neighborhood, drifting through the cracked window and settling on my lungs, the way regret settles on politicians. I was at my desk, recovering from the previous night's excitement, mainly checking whether my eyebrows had survived intact, when at 9:42 the doorbell rang with the kind of caution that suggested the person on the other side wasn't sure if the house was open for business or mourning. I went to the door and opened it on a woman whose expression could have passed for either. She was tall, poised, and dressed in tailored black that didn't scream widowhood, but suggested it politely. Her perfume reached me before her voice did, expensive, restrained with a faint metallic sweetness that made me think of money stacked inside a safe. She had the look of someone who wanted to appear calm but had spent the night pacing holes in a carpet. "Is Mr. Wolfe receiving?" she asked. "Receiving what?" I said. "Furniture, threats, bills. We accept all three, but the delivery schedule varies." She blinked once, deciding whether I was a doorman or a nuisance. Unfortunately for her, I could be both before lunch. "I am Mrs. Julius Fenn," she said. "I must speak with Mr. Wolfe immediately." I stepped aside. "Then you're in luck. He's awake, he's irritable, and he hasn't had breakfast yet. Follow me." Her heels clicked across the marble as I led her into the office. Wolfe sat behind his desk in a brown robe, heavier than his usual morning attire, as if he were armouring himself against the lingering scent of last night's smoke. The fire hadn't touched the brownstone, but it had certainly touched his nerves. Fritz stood at the doorway with a tray of coffee and buttered rolls, waiting for Wolfe's nod. Wolfe gave it, and Fritz vanished the way only a Swiss chef with decades of practice can vanish. "Good morning, madam," Wolfe said, gesturing her toward the red leather chair. "State your purpose." She sat with careful posture, hands clasped, knuckles pale. "My husband, Julius Fenn, was in the warehouse last night. He survived the fire. He called me from the street during the evacuation. But after the flames grew worse, he vanished. No one has seen him since." Wolfe tilted his head. "The police have not found a body." "No," her voice trembled. "And that is precisely what frightens me." I took a chair opposite her and folded my notebook open, not because I needed to take notes, but because people often talk more freely when they think their words are being immortalized. She glanced at Wolfe's globe briefly, narrowing her eyes as if the Balkans held confidential information her husband had once whispered to her. "My husband," she continued, "has enemies. Many. Last week he told me someone was pressuring him, threatening him. He didn't say who, only that the pressure was political and dangerous." Political pressure. That explained the tension Kramer had carried last night like an extra trench coat. Political operators have a way of turning every argument into arson, sometimes literally. Wolfe sipped his coffee. "And you would like me to find your husband?" "Yes, and to determine whether he was harmed." "You believe he was?" Wolfe didn't phrase it as a question. Her eyes shimmered. "I don't know what to believe, but I don't trust the police to look beyond the fire." That was a tempting fuse to light. If there's one thing guaranteed to bring Kramer through the door at the worst possible moment, it's someone questioning police competence within the city limits. Wolfe frowned. "Madam, honesty is imperative. Do not withhold." She winced, just slightly, just enough for me to catch it. A little flinch that suggested she had compartmentalized more than just grief. "I have told you everything," she lied. Wolfe leaned back, hands making a steeple. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "Prepare a retainer form." She turned sharply. "You'll take the case?" "You may engage me," Wolfe said coolly. "Whether I shall exert myself depends on your candor." Then, with all the delicacy of a guillotine, "Your husband was a strategist, a man who profited by manipulating information. It is reasonable to assume he concealed some from you." "I told you." "No," Wolfe said. "You told me what you consider safe." She swallowed. "What are your terms?" "A retainer of $5,000, he said, non-refundable, and absolute truthfulness. Without both, you may take your anguish to another doorstep." Her breath shook, but she nodded. "I can pay." I retrieved the retainer form from the file cabinet, typed her name, in full with no embellishment, and placed it before her. She signed with a trembling flourish. At 10:16, just as she finished, the phone rang. Wolfe closed his eyes, surrendering to the inevitability of procedural harassment. I answered. "Nero Wolfe's residence. Goodwin speaking." Kramer's voice crackled through, rough and tired. "Goodwin, put Wolfe on." I offered Wolfe the receiver, but he shook his head. Inform him I'm engaged. You heard the man, I told Kramer. He's engaged. Kramer growled. Tell him we haven't located Fenn's body, that's official. And tell him if he's taking clients connected to the fire, he'd better not obstruct anything. Wolfe held out his hand, deciding belatedly that diplomacy was the shorter route. I placed the phone in it. Inspector, Wolfe said smoothly, I never obstruct law enforcement. I merely insist that you not obstruct me. Kramer puffed hard enough that I could hear the cigar flare. Yeah, well, don't get clever, and keep Goodwin out of my ashes. I endeavour to keep him out of many things, Wolfe replied. Good day. He hung up gently, a courtesy he rarely extended to civilians. Mrs. Fenn inhaled shakily. So, the police found nothing? Not yet, I said. If they do, you'll hear the sirens before the telegram. She shot me a startled look, unsure whether I meant to comfort her or audition for insensitivity of the year. I kept my expression neutral. Sometimes a wisecrack is a diagnostic tool. Wolfe leaned forward. Now, madam, your husband's last known movements. She clasped her handbag tighter. He left our apartment yesterday afternoon around 4. He said he had a meeting downtown. He didn't tell me with whom. I wrote the time down. He usually keeps secrets from you. She hesitated. Too long. Not often. There it was, the inconsistency, the little slip that made her timeline wobble like a three-legged table. If you looked closer, you could hear the political machinery grinding beneath her calm exterior. Wolfe saw it too. You are omitting something. She stiffened. I'm frightened, Mr. Wolfe. I don't know who to trust. That is an argument for candour, not evasion. She stood abruptly. I will tell you more when I can. I must compose myself. Very well, Wolfe said, but be prompt and prudent. I escorted her to the door. Her perfume lingered behind her like a signature. When I returned, Wolfe was glaring at the stack of political journals on his desk. Confound politics, he muttered. A profession that rewards mendacity. Still want the case? I asked. He grunted. Archie, you will contact Mr. Panzer and Mr. Cohen and whoever else traffics in that deplorable realm of political gossip. Should I bring smelling salts? You look faint. Confound you, he said, but without bite. Miss Fenn tread softly but on treacherous ground, mind yourself. That was Wolfe's version of affection, embroidered with gloom. I jotted down a few notes, tucked the retainer away and stood. Shall I start with Saul or Lon? Both, he said, and spare me your flippancies, for 1 hour. I tipped my hat to him. I'll ration them. He closed his eyes briefly, the way he does when bracing for incoming nonsense, political, human, or Archie grade. Then he reached for the bell cord. Fritz, he called, bring beer for Mr. Goodwin before he departs. I can drink without hazard, I said. Pfui, Wolfe replied. Your restraint is a menace. Beer arrived cold and perfect, and Wolfe waved me off. As I stepped outside into the lingering ash of West 35th Street, it struck me that Julius Fenn wasn't the only one who had vanished into smoke. Some truths were going to burn a lot hotter. If Midtown had a smell that morning, it was the smell of typewriter ribbon cooked under too many lies. I stepped into the cramped political office at 10:11 a.m., and the air hit me like a blast furnace lined with carbon paper. Typewriters clacked in uneven rhythm, each one clicking out another excuse for democracy's latest disappointment. Saul Panzer had steered me to this nest of strategic vipers. One campaign donor, one shivering secretary, both allegedly tied to Julius Fenn's last week on Earth, or off it. The secretary looked as though she alphabetized her fears before expressing them. She perched behind her desk like a librarian hiding from overdue books. Nervous fingers tapped the keys of a Remington that hadn't asked for this kind of pressure. Her blouse had the faded dignity of a garment that once believed in itself. Mr. Goodwin, she whispered, glancing around as if political ghosts might overhear. That's me, I said, pulling up a chair that protested louder than the chair deserves. I hear you knew Julius Fenn. She nodded. He'd been getting messages. Anonymous. Threatening. Threatening how? Her fingers twisted. They said he should step back from the flames, that he knew too much. About, I prodded. She leaned closer. A rival strategist. They called him the Whisperer. I wrote that down, though not because I trusted the label. Political people love dramatic nicknames, makes them feel important. The Whisperer, I repeated. Man? Woman? Chimera? No one knew, she said, just rumours. They said he ruined people privately, destroyed their reputations before they even knew they were at risk. Sounds like half of Washington, I told her. She let out a panicked squeak and shook her head. Not like this. Fen was terrified. Truly. Red herring number 1. The secretary's version of terror could have come from a sternly written memo. Still, the detail was worth pocketing. I left her shaking behind the clattering Remington and walked down the corridor to meet the donor Saul had arranged. He was perched in a smoky office decorated with patriotic posters that had gone dull from disappointment. Thick curls of cigar smoke spiraled around him like a personal storm cloud. "You're Goodwin," he said, nodding at me without standing. "Saul said you needed to know about Julius." "I do," I said. "Heard he was getting heat from someone whispering in dark corners." The donor snorted. "Whisperer. Bah. Fen pissed off the wrong people, that's all. Happens when you juggle more secrets than you've got hands." "What kind of people?" He shrugged. "Big shots, quiet money, folks who don't like being leveraged. Maybe he deserved it." He flicked ash into a tray shaped like the state of New York. I told him he was playing with fire. Guess he finally got burned. "And the Whisperer?" "Could be Vickers," he said casually. "Could be someone else. But the rumour was loud enough." Another red herring. He tossed that name with the confidence of someone who wanted to redirect suspicion. I thanked him, left the smoky den of civic despair, and headed back to the Brownstone, where calm had the decency to pretend it existed. When I opened the office door, Wolfe was hunched over a spread of political memos like a man reading the autopsy of a language he loved, his lips pressed tight with disgust. "The Republic," he declared, "is ill-served by men who cannot draft a coherent declarative sentence." "I can confirm that from the field," I said, hanging my hat. "Your friend Julius had 2 people telling me he was being hunted by something called the Whisperer." Wolfe grunted. "Euphemisms. Politics thrives on them." I sat, pulling out my notes. Secretary claims he was scared. Donor thinks he deserved trouble. Both say threats escalated last week. "An insufficient accounting," Wolfe muttered. Before I could respond, the phone rang. I answered. Lon Cohen's voice zipped through, bright and fast, like caffeine with opinions. "Archie, get this. We've got eyewitnesses saying Julius Fen was seen sprinting down 10th Avenue after the fire. Alive." That kicked the morning in the teeth. "Sure?" I asked. "As sure as reporters can be before editors yell at them," Lon said. 3 witnesses, all say he ran like a spark off the flames." I thanked him, hung up, and turned to Wolfe. He was already scowling. More confusion. "More fun," I said. "Fen may not be as toasted as the warehouse." Wolfe opened his eyes just enough to glare. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "Contain yourself." At 11:03 a knock interrupted us. Firm, official, and timed just short of orchid hours, which suggested Kramer had chosen the moment with deliberate courtesy. I opened the door to him. He stood in the hall, coat smoky, cigar stub clinging to the corner of his mouth like a disgruntled barnacle. "Morning, Goodwin," he said. "Wolfe inside?" "He is," I replied, "and he's awake enough to argue." Kramer stepped in, removed his hat, and looked around the office with the resigned air of a man entering a chess match he didn't want to play, but expected to lose. "Wolfe," he said, giving a nod that was almost respectful. We pulled a scrap of burned paper from the warehouse. Wolfe motioned him forward. Kramer handed over a sealed envelope. Wolfe opened it delicately with a silver letter opener shaped like a stabbing hazard. Inside was a charred fragment of handwriting, barely legible, edges curled from heat. I leaned in. It read, "Before the flames begin." Wolfe tapped the paper. "Fen's hand?" "Pretty sure," Kramer said. "Lab's still confirming, but it looks like he knew something was coming." "Knew," Wolfe echoed, staring hard at the scrap. "But did not avoid." "Or didn't want to," I suggested. Kramer shot me a look, but it lacked venom. "Don't get imaginative, Goodwin. I came to show Wolfe because the boys at the Bureau think it's nothing, but," he sighed, "Wolfe may see patterns we miss." "That is a lamentable concession, Inspector," Wolfe said mildly, "but accepted." Kramer's jaw moved like he was chewing regret. "Don't make me repeat it." "No need," Wolfe said. "This is valuable." "Maybe," Kramer said, "but keep your distance. Don't obstruct us if you're working for the widow." Inspector, Wolfe said, voice slicing the air neatly. I do not obstruct justice. I only pursue truth. Kramer slid his hat back on. Fine, but keep Goodwin out of fires and political schemes. Last thing I need is him testifying about rumors. I try, Wolfe said. He resists my efforts. I smiled innocently. Occupational hazard. Kramer allowed himself half an eye roll, then nodded curtly. All right, Wolfe. I'll wait for your report if you've got one. He left with the efficiency of a man evacuating a building before paperwork caught fire. When the door shut, Wolfe exhaled deeply, fingers steepled. Archie? Yes, sir. We are approaching a fulcrum. Julius Fenn anticipated the conflagration. Literally or politically? Both, Wolfe said. Which is intolerable. I sat back, letting the tension coil. So what's the next move? We proceed methodically, he said, despite the circus. He glared at the memos again. These shadow puppeteers, men who hold influence without accountability, disgust me. That's politics, I said. That is idiocy, he corrected. He reached for the bell cord. Fritz appeared at the doorway within seconds, quiet, dignified, attentive. Coffee, Wolfe ordered. For Mr. Goodwin as well. Fritz nodded and vanished. The orchids would claim Wolfe in half an hour, but for now he was still anchored in the office, frowning at the burned scrap like it had personally insulted his vocabulary. I folded my notebook shut. I'll write up what I've got. Do so, he said. And Archie, be exact. Always, I replied, though we both knew that depended on the day. He turned back to the scrap of handwriting, one line hinting that Fenn knew the fire was coming, that he might have arranged a meeting ahead of it, that he might not be dead at all. Wolfe murmured, almost to himself, before the flames begin. Cryptic, I said. Deliberate, he answered. Fritz reappeared with the tray. The coffee's aroma cut through the lingering political stench. Wolfe accepted his cup with a grunt. I reached for mine, savouring the warmth. Outside, Manhattan clattered forward, unaware that its political shadows were lengthening. Inside, Wolfe sipped, closed his eyes, and said, Archie, prepare yourself. Something vexing approaches. That counted as a suspense hook in our line of work. I finished my coffee and waited for the next spark. If a man ever wants proof that Manhattan's upper crust is built on cheap glitter and expensive liquor, he only needs to walk into the Tilden Club at 3:17 in the afternoon. The chandeliers shine bright enough to stun a moth, the carpets swallow sound like guilt, and every consultant in a 50-block radius holds a martini as if it were a diploma from a disreputable university. I stepped inside, gave my coat to a man who looked insulted by fabric, and headed toward the bar where political gossip was traded at a higher rate than Treasury bonds. I spotted my target immediately, a sharp-tongued operative named Dale Varney, the sort of fellow who ruins reputations for sport and invoices extra if the victim cries. He sat in a leather chair positioned like a throne stolen from the wrong civilization, swirling gin he hadn't earned. Mr. Varney, I said, sliding into the opposite chair without invitation. Good afternoon. Archie Goodwin. You may have heard of me. I hear of all sorts of pests, he replied without looking up. Bartenders, typists, private detectives. Private detectives are pests now. When they come sniffing, yes, I smiled. Then consider me a bloodhound with a badge shaped like a shoe print. That finally got his attention. He eyed me the way a cat eyes a mouse that wants to negotiate terms. What do you want? Simple question. Simpler answer. Who's the whisperer? His eyebrow twitched. You don't want to ask that. I already did. Pretend you're not terrified. It'll help your posture. He leaned in, voice dropping like a theatre curtain. The whisperer, he said, is not a myth. It's Harlan Vickers. That name landed with the weight of a brick in a bowl of custard. Vickers was notorious, one of those political strategists who never appeared in public because the public couldn't afford the dry cleaning bill afterward. Vickers, I repeated. Tell me why. Because he destroys reputations quietly, efficiently, no fingerprints. You wake up and your career is gone, your donors vanish, and half the city wonders whose dog you kicked. Like Julius Fenn. Varney's eyes flickered. If Fenn crossed Vickers, he crossed the wrong man. Why? He smirked. Because Vickers doesn't forgive, he erases. I let the silence simmer a moment. It made Varney sweat, and sweating made him honest. So, I said, Fenn offended the wrong ghost. Varney's voice sharpened. If I were you, Goodwin, I'd stay out of this. People who ask about Vickers tend to regret it. Well, I said, I'm not known for my regret collection. Varney stood, tugging his jacket into place. Be careful. Even you can't charm your way past a man like him. He started to walk away, then turned back, lowering his tone. If Fenn was threatened, it wasn't by amateurs. It was Vickers. And if Vickers wanted him gone, that's enough, said a voice behind me. I turned. Saul Panzer stood 5 feet away, hands in his coat pockets, face calm as a meditation rug. His presence had the effect of draining courage from anyone with nervous guilt, which explained the way Varney nearly tripped backward. Mr. Panzer, I said, thanks for the atmospheric entrance. Timing, Saul replied, is a valuable asset. Varney muttered something unprintable and vanished into the club's haze. Saul took the open chair. Charming fellow, I said. Rattled fellow, Saul corrected. He was watching the door the entire time you spoke. Someone has him spooked. Vickers? Or someone using Vickers' name, Saul said. Shadow puppets. Doesn't take much to make political men jump. Fenn jumped, I said, possibly into a fire. Saul nodded. Watch your back with Vickers. He doesn't bluff. We left the Tilden Club together, stepping into daylight that felt disloyal after the dim decadence inside. Saul peeled off toward an address he wanted to investigate, and I headed back to the Brownstone, where sanity occasionally visited if Wolfe wasn't reading the news. Inside, the office smelled of warm paper, yellow silk robe, and mild outrage. Wolfe sat surrounded by political dossiers spread across his desk in uneasy stacks. He was reading Fenn's memos with the expression of a man force-fed ungrammatical soup. These, he declared as I entered, are atrocities. Which part? I said, dropping my hat on the rack. The corruption or the commas? All of it, Wolfe replied. The Republic suffers immensely from men who cannot write in complete sentences. I've always said extortionists need better schooling, I remarked. Maybe you can start a grammar academy for blackmail rings. Teach them to threaten with syntax. Wolfe growled. Phooey. I gave him the rundown. The club, Varney, the Vickers revelation. Wolfe listened, fingers steepled, eyes narrowed. Harlan Vickers, he murmured, a man who cultivates shadows. Yes, this aligns. With what? I asked. He tapped a memo. The fire was not merely destruction. It was curation. Files were targeted precisely. Blackmail? Almost certainly, Wolfe said. And political in nature. Whoever set that fire intended to erase specific evidence, not merely cause chaos. And Fenn? I asked. Wolfe exhaled. If he lived long enough to run from the scene, he may still hold pieces someone needs destroyed. Before I could respond, the phone rang. I grabbed it. Goodwin. Kramer's voice came through, gravelly as a driveway. Put Wolfe on. Wolfe extended a hand without enthusiasm. I handed him the receiver. Yes, Inspector? Kramer's tone held irritation wrapped in reluctant respect. We found something. Fenn's wallet. Where? Wolfe asked. In a taxi abandoned in Chelsea. Fully intact, cash still inside. Wolfe snorted. A spectacle of stagecraft. So, you think it was planted? Inspector, Wolfe said. Even you would not expect a man fleeing for his life to neatly leave his identification in a hired vehicle unless he wished to be found, or misfound. Kramer grunted. That's why I called. Also, there was a matchbook in the cab, Tilden Club. That, Wolfe said, is not a coincidence. No, Kramer admitted. Probably not. His voice lowered, professionally, not emotionally. Wolfe, don't go off half-cocked on this. You may be right about the wallet, but let us process it. Of course, Wolfe said with formal dignity. I applaud rigor. Uh-huh, Kramer replied. All right, I'll wait for your report. He hung up. Wolfe set the phone down with more delicacy than he usually granted telephones. So, I said, Fenn went to the Tilden Club, or someone wants us to think he did. Precisely, Wolfe murmured. Layers upon layers. Reputation warfare, the whisperer's game. I moved toward my desk. You want me to write this up? Yes, and thoroughly, Wolfe said. Our adversary traffics in perceptions. We must contend with fact. That your official endorsement of paperwork? "It is my resignation," Wolfe replied solemnly, "to necessity." He reached for the bell cord. Fritz appeared at the doorway. "Beer," Wolfe said, "for Mr. Goodwin." "And you?" Fritz asked. "No," Wolfe said, "I must think." Fritz nodded, glided away, and Wolfe closed his eyes, settling into the kind of silence that meant the world outside was temporarily unimportant, which left me with the matchbook, the whisperer, the planted wallet, and a strategist who might or might not be dead. When Fritz returned with the beer, I took it, cracked a smile, and said, "If Vickers likes silence, he's not going to enjoy meeting us." Wolfe didn't open his eyes. "Archie," he said, "I doubt very much he enjoys anything. If there's one thing Manhattan specializes in, it's taking a perfectly good morning and turning it into an autopsy." At 9:26 sharp, the phone rang while I was fortifying myself with coffee strong enough to dissolve weak moral character. Kramer's voice came through, flat, tired, and grim in a way that meant the universe had rolled up its sleeves. "Goodwin," he growled, "tell Wolfe we've got another body, and this one wasn't from the fire." That line gets a man moving quicker than a rent increase. 10 minutes later, Kramer was in Wolfe's office delivering what passed for a calm briefing by his standards, which meant he didn't crack the desk or smoke a hole in the carpet. "The fire inspectors found a second corpse," he said. "Male, gunshot wound, dead before ignition. The fire was meant to hide it." Wolfe leaned back, hands forming the familiar cathedral arch. "And not Fenn." "No," Kramer said. "This one's 6 foot broader shoulders. Bullet through the chest. Fire didn't reach the core tissue. Lab clock time of death around the same hour the blaze started." I stood by the globe, not because the Balkans were relevant, but because it kept me out of the line of Kramer's cigar. "So Fenn disappears, but someone else dies instead. That's a switch." "This isn't a carnival act, Goodwin," Kramer snapped, then sighed. "Sorry, been a long night." Wolfe nodded once, a gracious acceptance. "Inspector, your report?" Kramer handed him a thin folder. "We found a ring on the body, distinctive signet. Thought maybe you'd seen it before." Wolfe passed it to me. Inside was a glossy morgue photo of the deceased's left hand, charred but intact enough to see the ring. Gold, oval-faced, engraved with a stylized bee. "I'd like to examine the body," I said. Kramer grunted. "Fine, but no wandering, and don't rearrange anything." "Please," I said. "I only rearrange furniture and suspects." Wolfe ignored us both, studying the photo the way he studies disappointing menus. "Archie, go. Return promptly." The morgue had all the charm of a tax audit at midnight. The attendant lifted the sheet, revealing a man whose death had done nothing to improve his looks. His clothing was half burned, but the wound was unmistakable. A neat puncture over the sternum, fatal and unfussy. The ring glinted like a surviving thought. "Brackett," Lon Cohen told me later over the phone. "Leo Brackett, political fixer, small time but connected to the right roaches." "That matches the vibe," I said. Lon continued. "Word is he was tied up in blackmail ops. Names for cash, leverage for votes, that whole game." "Lovely," I said. "If hell needs consultants, it won't have to advertise." But the real twist came when the attendant handed me a plastic envelope containing the victim's personal effects. On top was a half-burned scrap of paper, words barely legible. Brownstone, burned down. I frowned. "Cute," I muttered. "Someone likes symbolism." The attendant blinked at me. "You know what it means?" "No one knows what anything means in politics," I said, "but Wolfe will." I left the morgue with the ring's image imprinted on my retinas and the cryptic note rattling around in my brain like a nickel in a washing machine. The cab driver who brought me back to the Brownstone tried to make small talk about baseball. I tried to pretend the universe wasn't unraveling. Inside, Wolfe sat in his chair like the world's grumpiest Buddha. His eyes opened as I entered. "Well?" "Leo Brackett," I said. "Shot before burning, fancy ring, blackmail ties." Wolfe nodded. "And the note?" I handed him a photostat. He read it, snorted, and muttered, "The metaphor eludes the common ear." "Maybe," I said, "but in Manhattan, metaphors usually come with a beat cop attached." Wolfe gave me a sideways glance. "Flippancy is not analysis." "Flippancy keeps me sane," I replied. "Analysis keeps you fed." He ignored that and tapped the photostat. "Brownstone, burned, down." "You think it's about our place?" I asked. "Phooey," Wolfe said. This refers to the political faction called the Brownstones, old guard power brokers. They have been crumbling under modern pressures. So Brackett knew something explosive. Precisely. A faint bell rang, Fritz announcing coffee. Wolfe waved him in. The warmth and aroma filled the room with enough civility to soften the morgue's memory. At 11:40, Kramer returned, calmer, but only by degrees. "Wolfe," he said, placing his hat carefully on the stand, "I've confirmed ID on the body. Brackett. And before you ask, no, we still haven't found Fenn." "We are aware," Wolfe said. "Sit, Inspector." Kramer hesitated, then took the red chair like a man accepting a fate he didn't recall signing for. "We found something else," he said, sliding out another scrap. "Writing matches Brackett's notebook. Same phrasing as your copy." Wolfe studied it. "Yes, this references the political Brownstones." Kramer raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" "I am rarely unsure," Wolfe replied. Kramer sighed. "Fine. Then this means someone wanted to torch evidence tied to political blackmail, and Brackett was the loose end." "That is the reasonable conclusion," Wolfe said. "Whether Fenn was also targeted remains to be determined." Kramer rubbed his forehead. "Wolfe, look. I'm not admitting you're right, but you're not wrong." Wolfe inclined his head in a gesture that, for him, was the equivalent of popping a champagne cork. Kramer stood. "All right, Wolfe. I'll wait for your report." I escorted him out. When I returned, Wolfe was still staring at Brackett's note. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "We are at a fulcrum. Brackett's death shifts the axis." "And Fenn?" "He is either in hiding or in danger. Possibly both." I sat down, flipping open my notebook. "What now?" "Document everything," Wolfe said. "Every detail, every whisper." "Speaking of whispers," I said, "Vickers?" "Possibly connected," Wolfe said. "Possibly orchestrating." He reached for the bell cord again, summoning Fritz for a fresh pot. The orchids would claim him soon, but for now his mind worked like a furnace. I watched him, thinking how odd it was that a burned building, a vanished strategist, and a dead fixer could all orbit a single word, Brownstone, and how none of it meant our house had burned, only the political machine pretending it hadn't. Wolfe murmured, "The metaphor eludes the common ear." "Not ours," I said. "If Manhattan could bottle dread and sell it on street corners, the vintage Lydia Fenn brought into our office that morning could have made her a millionaire." At 10:03, the doorbell chimed with the kind of hesitant note people use when they're afraid the truth will answer. I opened it expecting a delivery boy or a tax form, but instead there she stood, wrapped in a grey coat that seemed to hold her together out of sheer obligation. Her eyes carried the brittle shine of a woman who'd learned too much since last we'd seen her. "Mr. Goodwin," she breathed. "I must speak to Mr. Wolfe. Now." I ushered her in. She moved like someone listening for footsteps behind her, and given the city she lived in, that wasn't paranoia, just good sense. Wolfe was in his chair, a mountain of controlled disapproval. His eyebrows twitched upward when Lydia entered. He doesn't encourage walk-ins unless they bring orchids or dinner. "Madam," he said, "you appear unwell." She clasped her gloves together so tightly I feared they'd file for separation. "Mr. Wolfe, I must tell you something I concealed before. Julius, my husband, he found something, a dossier, a very dangerous one." Wolfe stiffened. "You withheld material facts?" "Yes." Her voice cracked. "He lied to me about its contents, but I saw enough. It would destroy the Brownstone block. Names, money, threats. And Julius feared. He feared someone meant to silence him." Wolfe's tone turned arctic. "You deceived me. That endangers the investigation. It also endangers Mr. Goodwin." I leaned a hip against my desk. "Nice to know I'm on the hazard list." She spun toward me. "I never meant, Mr. Goodwin, please believe me. I was terrified. Julius thought we were both targets." "And now?" I asked. She swallowed. "Now I think he was right." Wolfe drew in a breath the size of a moral lecture. "Madam, deception is intolerable. If you withhold anything further, I withdraw at once." "No, Mr. Wolfe, please." She stepped closer, trembling. "You must continue. You're the only one who can find him." Wolfe glared at her gloved hands. "You imperil my assistant as well as yourself when you trifle with facts." That was Wolfe's version of chivalry. Scolding wrapped in protective thunder. I gave him a little salute in acknowledgement, which he ignored on principle. Lydia produced a small envelope. Julius hid this in a book. I found it last night. Inside was a clipped newspaper article, a list of donors, and scribbled initials in the margin, Fenn's handwriting. Wolfe skimmed it, lips pressed in distaste. "This is not a dossier. This is a breadcrumb." "It's all I have," she whispered. "And insufficient," he muttered. "Archie, we require corroboration. Seek out Mrs. Adelaide Torrance. She funds reform initiatives and has ties to Fenn's circle." "Ties," I repeated. "Friendly, romantic, or mutually beneficial blackmail?" "Do not be vulgar," Wolfe said. "All three are possible." Before Lydia left, Wolfe gave her a final heavy stare. "Madam, no further omissions." She nodded, defeated. I escorted her out, noticing how she looked back at the Brownstone as if hoping it could shield her from whatever wolves, lowercase, were following her. Fifth Avenue penthouses have a talent for looking serene even when the world underneath them burns. Adelaide Torrance's salon was the kind of room that made you sit straighter, whether or not you had anything to confess. Crystal lamps glowed, imported rugs cushioned the footsteps of the guilty, and the floral arrangement in the corner probably cost more than my suit. Her butler moved silently, too silently. If footsteps were a currency, he was bankrupt. He glided toward me with tea I didn't want, and a stare that assessed whether I deserved oxygen. "Mr. Goodwin," Mrs. Torrance said, sweeping in with a presence that belonged on a postage stamp. She was elegant in a way that suggested elegance was a genetic trait. "Nero Wolfe sent you?" "Yes, ma'am," I said. "He would have come himself, but he's allergic to leaving the house." "A condition I sympathize with," she said dryly. "Do sit." I did, sinking into a chair softer than most promises. She watched me with a calmness sharpened by intelligence. "You're here about Julius Fenn," she said. "Yes." Her fingers traced the rim of her teacup. "He approached me last month. He wanted to sell information. Dangerous information." "Blackmail?" "I prefer leverage," she said. "It sounds less sordid." "Did you buy?" "Certainly not," she said. "I support political reform, Mr. Goodwin, not political melodrama." "Then why did Brackett try to sell you files?" I asked. Her eyes flicked upward, just for an instant, a crack in the veneer. Leo Brackett was desperate. Men like him always are before the fall. "And did you help him?" I asked. She gave a small, humorless smile. "I do not set fires, Mr. Goodwin. I fund libraries." That didn't answer the question, but it was elegant enough to distract from that fact, a red herring wrapped in a silk ribbon. "Did Julius fear for his life?" I asked. Her expression tightened. "He feared many things. He was intelligent enough to know that knowledge is a liability." She rose and walked to a desk. From a drawer she retrieved a photostat. "This came anonymously several days ago. The handwriting resembles Julius's, but cruder. Perhaps he was rushing." I took it. A threatening letter, cryptic, accusatory, hinting at exposure. The handwriting, yes. It looked like Fenn's style had been shoved through a mangle. "You kept this quiet," I said. "Of course," she replied. "One does not advertise threats." I stood. "Mrs. Torrance, may I bring this to Wolfe?" "You may bring a copy," she said. "I am keeping the original." I nodded. Her butler materialized without sound, still moving like a man allergic to footsteps, and escorted me out. If he had a pulse, I didn't see evidence. Back at the Brownstone, Wolfe was entrenched behind his desk, piles of political papers stacked like barricades. He eyed the photostat the way normal people eye storm clouds. "So," he said, "Brackett courted Torrance. Fenn feared exposure. The Brownstones are under quiet siege." "You're welcome, I said. I even refrained from rearranging her furniture. "Your restraint astonishes me," he muttered. I sat and stretched. She denied involvement in the fire. "Which means nothing," Wolfe replied. "What is the tenor of her denial?" "Upper crust cool with a hint of get off my rug." Wolfe snorted. "Descriptive, if insufficient." He examined the letter again. "The handwriting is similar, but is it Fenn's or counterfeit?" "You're the genius," I said. "I'm just the delivery boy." "Pfui," he replied. "Mr. Goodwin, you are considerably more than that, which is why," he fixed me with a stern gaze, "you will use caution. You are now entangled in a network of influence that devours carelessness. That was Wolfe's way of saying he didn't want me shot, stabbed, incinerated, or turned into political leverage. I'll be good, I said. Scout's honor. You were never a scout. Exactly, so I won't disappoint. Wolfe sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. Archie, this dossier, if it exists, could topple long-standing power structures. I know. Lydia's terrified, and Torrance is hiding something. He pressed a button on the desk bell. Fritz appeared within seconds, immaculate. Bring beer for Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said, and something calming for me. Chamomile? Fritz suggested. If necessary, Wolfe conceded, which meant the universe truly was in upheaval. Fritz departed. Wolfe stared at the photostat as though it contained a recipe he disliked but had to cook anyway. Archie, he said softly, this woman, Torrance, did she exhibit fear? Maybe, I said. Or maybe she's just good at wearing calm like a mink coat. Wolfe nodded. Very well, we proceed, but cautiously. Fritz returned with the beer. I took it, cracked it open, and raised it in salute. To wealthy patrons, I said, who stir political storms from velvet chairs. Wolfe closed his eyes. Archie, spare me your metaphors. Blame Manhattan, I said. It's contagious. Wolfe opened one eye. Your levity is appreciated. Now be silent. He leaned back, thinking. Heavy, deliberate, dangerous thinking. And I knew the next move would shake more than a few velvet chairs. If you want a quick reminder that Manhattan loves you only when you're buying something, try walking out of a Fifth Avenue penthouse after asking inconvenient questions. I'd barely made it to the street before I felt the prickle at the back of my neck, the one that tells you you've just been promoted from detective to quarry. Two men, both with the subtle grace of upright refrigerators, peeled off from a lamppost and began shadowing me with all the stealth of a taxi strike. Now, being tailed isn't new to me. I've been followed by pros, amateurs, romantics, and the chronically confused. But these two had a purpose, and that purpose was shaped suspiciously like Harlan Vickers. Their coats were cheap, their shoes newer than their brains, and when they crossed the street after me without checking traffic, I knew I was dealing with muscle hired by someone who didn't value return clientele. I picked up speed, turning the corner near 52nd, letting the Midtown neon smear the sidewalk like spilled varnish. They kept pace. The night breeze carried the scent of cigarette smoke, exhaust, and ambition gone sour. I angled toward a newspaper loading dock where stacks of bundled morning editions waited to meet their doom under rubber-gloved hands. That's when they struck. The first one grabbed my shoulder. The second blocked my path. The choreography was good. These boys had practiced on smaller prey. Evening, I said. If this is about my overdue library book, I can explain. Shut it, growled the thicker one, shoving me toward the loading bay. You've been asking about Mr. Vickers. And he doesn't like questions, the other added, cracking his knuckles like a man auditioning for a wind chime orchestra. Well, I said, I don't like people who talk about themselves in the third person, so here we are. They lunged. I ducked under the first swing and introduced my elbow to someone's diaphragm. The man folded like a collapsible chair and wheezed like a radiator in February. The second one grabbed my collar and tried to turn my face into an abstract sculpture. I returned the favor with a right hook that sent him stumbling into a stack of newspapers, which exploded around him like ticker tape at a parade celebrating poor life choices. But numbers matter. They regrouped, angrier, clumsier, and determined to ruin my evening. The biggest one swung again, and this time he connected with my jaw. I've been hit harder, but not by someone who looked like he filed his fists with gravel. Stars burst in my vision, and for a moment I reconsidered my career path, maybe towards something safer, like lion taming. They shoved me against the brick wall. One pulled a knife. Last chance, he hissed. Stop digging. I was about to offer him a souvenir shovel when a sound split the air behind us. The low, unmistakable rumble of Pearly Stebbins doing what Pearly Stebbins did best, approaching like divine punishment wearing a badge. Before I could blink, Stebbins launched himself at the man with the knife. It wasn't a tackle, it was a full-body indictment. They went down in a heap that rattled the dock. The second thug tried to bolt, but I caught his arm and introduced his face to a wooden crate. He didn't appreciate the craftsmanship. Pearly cuffed them with the efficiency of a man who'd done it before breakfast twice. Then he rounded on me. "Goodwin," he barked, "what the hell are you doing? Sticking your nose where professionals breathe." "Nice to see you too, Pearlie," I said, rubbing my jaw. "You always arrive just in time to save me, or do you have an alarm that goes off when I'm about to be perforated?" He glared. "You're lucky I was nearby. Crime scene 2 blocks over. I saw these lugs tailing you and figured you'd get yourself into something stupid." "I don't need help getting into stupid," I said. "It comes naturally." Pearlie looked at the unconscious man whose pocket he was rifling. He froze. "Well, I'll be damned." "What?" Stebbins held up a handkerchief, monogrammed with JF. "Julius Fenn," he said. "At least unless Midtown has another JF who hangs out with thugs." "That's a twist," I muttered. "Either Fenn handed out his linens as party favours, or someone wants us to think he did." Pearlie pocketed the evidence bag. "I'll take these 2 in, but Goodwin, you're circling something big. If Vickers' goons are tailing you personally, you better tell Wolfe to keep his doors locked." "Wolfe locks his doors," I said. "He just doesn't lock his temper." Stebbins grunted, his version of agreement. "Try not to get killed before I write the paperwork." "Wouldn't dream of it," I said, watching him haul the thugs away. When I got back to the Brownstone, the atmosphere had all the warmth of an iceberg on probation. Wolfe sat behind his desk, fingers steepled, a frown deep enough to bury confessions in. He didn't speak as I entered, which meant he already knew I'd been juggling gorillas. "Well?" he said finally. "I picked up a couple of dance partners," I replied. "Vickers sent muscle. Stebbins broke up the party." Wolfe's nostrils flared. "Archie, must you treat danger as a pastime? If I said no, would you believe me?" He scowled. "Your levity is a vexation." "That's why you keep me around," I said, dropping into my chair. "I add zest." "This is intolerable," Wolfe muttered. "Your judgment is generally sound, but your impulsiveness—" "Saved my life," I said. "With help from Pearlie. You should send him a fruit basket." "Phooey," Wolfe snapped. "Inspector Stebbins is a mule with a license." "Sure," I said. But tonight he was my mule. He shot me a look that carried equal parts fury and affection, his version of a hug. "Show me the clue," he said. I handed him the monogrammed handkerchief, now sealed in an evidence envelope Stebbins had begrudgingly let me photocopy. Wolfe examined it with distaste. "Fenn," he said quietly, "or a fabrication meant to imitate him." "Why carry a dead man's laundry?" I asked. "Symbolism," Wolfe replied. "Or misdirection." He drummed his fingers on the armrest, a metronome of irritation. "This escalation is unacceptable. If Vickers seeks to intimidate us, he miscalculates." "That's the spirit," I said. "Declare war before dinner." Wolfe glared. "Archie, understand this clearly. Your safety is not negotiable." That stopped me for a second. Wolfe rarely stepped out from behind his fortress of vocabulary and protocol. When he did, it meant something. I lifted an eyebrow. "Planning to bubble wrap me?" "If it were effective, yes," Wolfe said. "But since it is not, you will—" The doorbell rang, interrupting the lecture I was both earning and dodging. Fritz appeared silently at the office threshold. "Inspector Stebbins wishes to speak with Mr. Goodwin." Wolfe huffed. "Send him in." Pearlie entered with his bulldog shoulders squared and his patience left outside with his hat. "Goodwin, Wolfe," he grunted. "Those boys we scooped up, they're Vickers regulars, and they're scared, really scared." "Of what?" I asked. Pearlie lowered his voice. "They say Fenn's alive." Wolfe's eyebrows shot upward. Pearlie continued. "And someone's paying good money to keep him that way, and out of sight." "That's contradictory," I said. "Why protect a man whose handkerchief is being used as thug decor?" Pearlie shrugged. "Ask Vickers, or whoever's paying his bills." He turned to leave, paused, and said gruffly, "Goodwin, don't get dead." "Is that an official directive?" I asked. "Yeah," he muttered. "Paperwork if you do." He left. Wolfe watched the closed door for a long moment. "Archie," he said quietly, "this has become untenable." "You sound worried," I teased. He didn't rise to the bait. "I am irritated," he said, "because the thought of you being harmed is intolerable." That was as close as Nero Wolfe ever came to tenderness. I let it sit in the air, warm and heavy. "So," I said after a moment, "hazard pay." Wolfe glared. "Get out, and bring me the Fenn file." "Yes, sir," I said, grinning. As I fetched the folder, I thought about the thugs, the handkerchief, and Fenn's ghost shadowing the city. Someone had put me in the crosshairs tonight, which meant Wolfe was about to put them under the microscope, and the microscope always wins. Some mornings Manhattan wakes up polite, others it wakes up gnawing its own nerves, and this was one of the latter. By the time I reached the Brownstone at 9:47, Saul Pantzer was already planted in Wolfe's red chair like a quiet omen. He didn't bother with greetings. Saul only looks relaxed when someone else is on the brink of ruin. "I've got it," he said before I could hang up my hat. "Got what?" I asked. "The piece you were missing," Saul replied, adjusting his cap. Julius Fenn wasn't freelancing. He was on Keller's payroll. Raymond Keller, Senate candidate, media darling, a grin polished by professionals and policies polished by fear. Wolfe lowered the morning paper. "Explain." Saul placed a small envelope on Wolfe's desk. Inside, receipts, notes, and a discreet contract. Typed, unsigned, but unmistakably linking Fenn to Keller's campaign. Fenn was feeding Keller opposition research, Saul said. Files on donors, blackmail angles, the whole Brownstone network. Quietly. Keller wanted leverage in case the block turned on him. "Politics," I said. "Where integrity goes to be cremated." Wolfe ignored me. "Why the secrecy?" "Because someone inside Keller's camp was leaking to Vickers," Saul replied. "Fenn suspected it. He told a friend he felt watched." Saul leaned back. If Brackett was part of the blackmail ring, he might have threatened exposure. Someone killed him. The fire cleaned up the trail. Wolfe nodded once, his version of applause. "Archie, you will visit Keller's headquarters, with restraint." "Always my specialty," I said, which made Saul smile faintly, the closest thing to thunder in his emotional climate. Keller's headquarters took up the entire 11th floor of a midtown office building whose elevators sighed like overworked nurses. When I stepped out, I saw what democracy looks like backstage. Exhausted aides, walls plastered with polling maps, typewriters clacking misery, and cigarette smoke thick enough to require nautical charts. A receptionist whose eyes held the 1,000-yard stare of campaign season waved me toward a side room. "Mr. Goodwin, that's where Keller's staff will see you." Inside, 2 junior aides pored over strategy sheets. They looked up as I entered, one twitchy, one polished, both drowning in caffeine. "I'm Archie Goodwin," I said. "I'm here about Julius Fenn." The polished one stiffened. "Mr. Fenn doesn't work here." "That's cute," I said, "but the paperwork says otherwise." The twitchy one blurted, "He was feeding files, okay? Opposition intel. Everybody knew except Keller." Polished shot him a death stare. "Nobody knew," he corrected mechanically. Twitchy swallowed. "Fine, but he said someone here was leaking to Vickers. He was scared." I leaned on the desk. "Got a name?" He shook his head. "No, but he'd stop mid-sentence sometimes, like he thought someone was listening. And last week—" "Don't," Polish snapped. "Just don't." The tension between them was thick enough to slice and serve with gravy. I flashed a grin. "Gentlemen, you've been very educational. Don't worry. I'll just mention in my report that you helped voluntarily." They both paled. I left the headquarters with enough smoke in my lungs to legally qualify as a chimney and enough intel to make Wolfe raise an eyebrow past the safety limit. The afternoon sun hit me like divine mockery as I flagged a cab. I'd almost reached the Brownstone when I spotted Kramer's familiar bulldog silhouette on the steps. He did not look annoyed. He looked burdened, a rarity. Inside the office, Wolfe motioned him to a seat with something close to diplomatic courtesy. "Inspector," Wolfe said. "You have news?" Kramer handed him a sealed envelope. "Ballistics just came back. The bullet that killed Brackett came from a weapon registered to Keller's security chief." Wolfe's eyebrow twitched. "That is consequential." Kramer grunted. "Doesn't mean Keller ordered it. Could have been rogue action. Could have been planted. But motive? Keller had it. If Brackett threatened to expose the Brownstone block, Keller might have wanted the leverage gone before anyone else got to it." Wolfe studied him. "Inspector, you rarely speak in hypotheticals." "I'm trying something new," Kramer snapped, then softened. "Look, Wolfe, this case is bigger than clean lines. Politics muddies everything. I need your insight on motive structures, not finger-pointing. I've got enough of that from City Hall." Wolfe inclined his head. I can outline the architecture of the crime, but I will not accuse until the proof completes itself. Kramer sighed, a weary professional sound. Fair enough. I'll wait for your report. He stood, nodded at me, and left with a dignity that looked borrowed but genuine. After he departed, Wolfe opened the envelope fully, reading the ballistics report with a grim frown. The document contained an internal Keller memo as well, highlighted, annotated, and dangerous. The line read, "Brownstone collapse imminent." "Well," I said, "that's subtle." Wolfe tapped the memo. "This confirms Fenn's involvement and his peril. If the Brownstones were collapsing, Keller needed new leverage, or needed to ensure certain men didn't speak." "Like Brackett?" "Yes, and perhaps Fenn." I sat down. "Saul says someone in Keller's camp was feeding Vickers intel." "Precisely," Wolfe murmured. "A leak within the reformers, a murderer within the operatives, a strategist hiding in shadow, and a political machine held together with chewing gum." Wolfe shot me a glare. "Archie, your levity is—" "A vexation," I finished. "I know, but useful." He exhaled through his nose, which is Wolfe's version of conceding a point. "Summarize your visit." I walked him through the smoke-choked headquarters, the twitchy aide, the slip about the leak, and the fear lingering under the fluorescent lights. Wolfe listened, steepled fingers tapping slowly. When I reached the part where the aide blurted the truth, Wolfe muttered, "Incompetence is occasionally convenient." "Convenient for us," I said. "Not for Keller." Wolfe ignored that. "We have motive," he said, "means, opportunity, but we lack the central thread." "Fenn." "Precisely," Wolfe echoed. "Is he alive, dead, hiding, protected, hunted?" I sighed. "All of the above." He shot me a baleful glance. "Archie." Fritz appeared at the doorway, right on schedule. "Dinner is in 1 hour," he announced. "Thank you, Fritz," Wolfe said. "Bring beer for Mr. Goodwin." Fritz nodded, gliding out. Wolfe leaned back. "We approach culmination. Keller's block fractures. Vickers maneuvers unseen. Fenn plays a role we do not yet discern." "And Brackett?" "Brackett was the first domino," Wolfe said. "The fire obscured his fall, but the pattern persists." I stretched my legs. "So what's next?" Wolfe closed his eyes. "We wait for the final piece to reveal itself." "That's not very active," I said. "It is cerebral," he replied. Fritz returned with my beer. I cracked it, sipped, and said, "So Keller's headquarters is a nest of secrets?" "No," Wolfe corrected. "A scaffold, built on ambition, supported by deception." "And ready to collapse?" Wolfe opened one eye. "Imminently." He lifted the Keller memo, the one referencing the Brownstone collapse, and tapped it once. "The candidate hides in shadows," Wolfe murmured, "but shadows eventually burn." And that was the hook, sharp as a ballot box blade, leading straight to the end game. Some evenings the Brownstone feels like a bunker for genius. Other evenings it feels like a bunker for madness. By 6:42 p.m, Wolfe's office looked like both, a sanctum built of books, cigar smoke, and political rot laid bare in documents across the desk. Wolfe sat amid it all, drawing lines through the muck like a cartographer charting a continent of sins. "Archie," he said, tapping a memo with 2 fingers as heavy as verdicts, "the pattern clarifies itself. Julius Fenn acquired a dossier lethal to the Brownstone block. Brackett attempted to monetize it. Vickers staged the fire to obliterate the remnants, and Keller's associates, cornered by exposure, responded with murder." "That's the American political system?" I asked. "I liked it better when it only involved lawn signs." Wolfe ignored me, which meant I was right. He reached for Torrance's photostat and Keller's internal memo, laying them like cards in a losing poker hand. "Vickers," he continued, "sought to erase evidence. Keller's faction sought to silence those who might reveal their duplicity, a confluence of motives, a convergence of guilt." "And Fenn?" I asked. Wolfe's gaze narrowed. "Fenn lies at the center of it. Whether alive or dead, he holds the thread. But the dossier is the key." "Or whatever's left of it," I said. "Between fires, blackmail, attempted muggings, and political melodrama, I'm not optimistic." "You are rarely optimistic," Wolfe said. It is one of your virtues." Before I could reply, the phone rang. Fritz appeared at the doorway, because phones ringing always seemed beneath Wolfe's dignity, and handed me the receiver. "Goodwin," a smug voice oozed through. "Mr. Goodwin, I understand you've been looking for me." "Harlan Vickers," I said. "I was hoping you'd crawl out from under something." He chuckled. "Charming. I would prefer to speak privately." "No," I said. "The world has enough poorly lit alleys." "So be it," he replied. "If you insist on conversation, meet me at my office within the hour." "Fine," I said. "But if you have more thugs waiting to audition for the Olympics, I'm not giving scores." The line clicked. Wolfe exhaled through his nose, a sign of royal displeasure. "Exercise caution. Vickers is a dissembler, and you are incautious." "I'm insulted," I said. "I'm also going." Vickers kept an office on West 49th, tucked inside a building that smelled like ambition lightly fried in cigarette ash. I found him leaning against his desk in a suit cut sharp enough to slice onions. His hair was slicked back with a product that had probably ruined lesser men. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, folding his arms, "you've been quite a nuisance." "That's what the business card should say," I replied. "Now let's talk arson." His smile tightened. "Arson is such an ugly word." "Not as ugly as murder," I said. "But we can work our way up." He shrugged theatrically. "You're fishing in poisoned waters. Fenn was reckless. Brackett was incompetent. I merely facilitated an adjustment." "By hiring men to torch a warehouse." His eyes sharpened. "Prove it." I leaned in. "We traced the accelerant to a contracting firm on your payroll. Very sloppy of you. You usually clean up better." For the first time, the smugness cracked. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "You traced that?" "Oh, yes," I said cheerfully. "Your men shouldn't leave receipts lying around. They're like breadcrumbs for detectives with too much free time." He sat down hard, the veneer of supremacy evaporating. "This is political warfare, Goodwin. You have no idea how deep it goes." "Try me." Fenn was going to expose everyone. Brownstones, Keller, the donors, all of them. He wanted to burn the machine down. "And you staged a fire to beat him to it." "He forced my hand," Vickers hissed. "He played both sides. He thought he could blackmail power itself." I crossed my arms. "Where is he now?" Vickers stared at me with a mix of contempt and caution. "If I knew that," he whispered, "I wouldn't be sitting here." A red herring? Possibly. But fear shone in his eyes, a fear not of guilt but of irrelevance. Someone else in this mess had wrested control of the narrative. "I'll be in touch," I said. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he snapped. "Vickers," I said. "I've been shot at, chased, punched, and nearly flambéed this week. Whoever I'm dealing with, they should be afraid of me." Back at the Brownstone, Wolfe awaited my report with irritation simmering under the surface. His fingers drummed the armrest, a Morse code of impatience. "Well?" I gave him everything. Vickers' smirk, Vickers losing the smirk, the accelerant trace, his half-confession, his denial about Fenn. Wolfe absorbed it, expression tightening. Vickers is a manipulator, but not the architect. The pattern does not originate with him. Before we could continue, the phone rang again. Fritz fetched it and passed it to Wolfe this time. "Yes?" Wolfe murmured. Kramer's voice crackled through, gruff but controlled. "Wolfe, lab, just confirmed it. The accelerant was commercial grade and came directly from a batch purchased by Vickers' contracting company." "So Mr. Goodwin's inference was correct," Wolfe said, not bothering to hide the slight triumph. Kramer grunted. "Yeah, don't gloat. Also, Brackett's murder weapon. We found more. The gun was cleaned recently. Someone tried to erase prints. Bad job." Wolfe closed his eyes. "Inspector, the structure is now complete, but the edifice requires assembly." Kramer exhaled. "Okay, Wolfe, I'll admit it. Your theory holds water. What you don't have is the missing man." "Fenn," Wolfe said, "alive or deceased?" "That's your job to figure out," Kramer growled. "But I'll tell you this. Keller's team is cracking, and Vickers is panicking. Someone's going to break." He hung up. Wolfe turned to me. "We are ready." "Ready for what?" I asked. He pressed the bell cord. "For the conclusion, Mr. Goodwin. Summon all principals to the Brownstone tomorrow at 8. I blinked. "All of them? Vickers, Torrance, Keller's aides, Lydia? Everyone?" "Yes." That's not a gathering, I said. That's a grenade. Nevertheless, Wolfe replied, invite them. I should probably update my will, I muttered. Your career, Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said dryly, is regrettably necessary to me. Touching, I said. Do not preen. Fritz entered with the evening tray, cheese biscuits, olives, and Wolfe's pre-dinner beer, served only because it was afternoon and Wolfe's nerves were in tatters. Wolfe took the glass, glared at the papers spread before him, and said, Archie, bring me the photostat dossier and the Keller memo. I retrieved them and laid them in front of him, pieces of a puzzle that smelled of smoke and corruption. He tapped each one, slowly like a judge reading charges. The fire, he murmured, never reached us, but its purpose did. And there it was, the suspense hook, glowing hotter than any warehouse blaze, pointing straight toward the showdown that would set every fuse alight. If there's one thing Manhattan never learns, it's when to shut up. By 8 o'clock the next night, the city hummed outside like a boiler about to burst. But inside Nero Wolfe's office, silence held court, the thick, pulsing silence of a storm waiting for permission to start. Wolfe had arranged the room like a general staging battlefield positions. He sat behind his desk in the yellow chair, immovable as a continent. I took my usual spot beside the globe, ready to pounce or record, dealer's choice, and our guests filled the room like constellations forced into collision. Lydia Fenn perched on the edge of a chair, pale, but holding herself together with last strands of dignity. Mrs. Adelaide Torrance sat upright with aristocratic frostiness, her gloved hands folded as if prepared to sign a treaty or deny one existed. Harlan Vickers was all brittle arrogance, chin lifted, eyes sharp but twitching at the corners. And Keller's jittery aide, polished from the headquarters, sweated into his collar as though the room temperature rose with each breath Wolfe drew. Inspector Kramer stood back by the bookshelves, arms crossed, cigar unlit between his fingers, a mark of respect or preparation. His eyes moved from face to face, sharp as evidence pins on a map. Wolfe began without ceremony. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, the time for obfuscation has expired. We will now proceed. If I'd said it, someone would have groaned. Coming from Wolfe, it landed like scripture. He continued. A man set fire to a warehouse, another shot Leo Brackett, another hid Julius Fenn, and all of you know why. Lydia flinched at her husband's name. Vickers smirked. Too fast, too shallow. Torrance didn't blink. The aide's Adam's apple bobbed like a drowning man. Wolfe turned to Kramer. Inspector, have your men reached the rendezvous? Kramer grunted. They're bringing him up. Him, Lydia whispered, breath hitching. I didn't have time to comfort her. Wolfe was already taking verbal scalpels to the room. We begin, Wolfe said, with Mr. Vickers. His role is elementary. He set the fire. Vickers laughed, a brittle, hollow sound. Prove it, Wolfe. Your pet detective traced accelerant to a contractor. Yes, but inference isn't proof. My inference, Wolfe said, is often indistinguishable from proof. But very well, your contractor purchased the exact accelerant in a batch unique to that week. And your men, Mr. Vickers, were seen outside the building before the blaze. One carried a handkerchief monogrammed JF, an attempt to mislead. Vickers scowled. Circumstantial. Wolfe's lips twitched. More than circumstantial when viewed in context. You sought to eliminate evidence Brackett handled, fearing he would sell the dossier to forces beyond your control. Torrance's fingers tightened on her handbag. Lydia looked between them like her world was unravelling thread by thread. And Brackett? Kramer asked, voice cold. Wolfe shifted slightly. Serious ground. Brackett was killed by Keller's security chief. The aide jolted upright. No, no, Mr. Wolfe, I swear. You were not the shooter, Wolfe said. But you know he was on Keller's payroll. The aide's mouth opened and closed. He was supposed to retrieve the documents, that's all. Retrieval, Wolfe said, does not ordinarily involve murder. He panicked, the aide blurted. Brackett threatened to go to the Brownstones. He said he'd blow the whole operation sky high unless Keller paid him double. The chief thought, if Brackett was gone, the problem was gone. Kramer's low curse filled the room. And the warehouse fire? Torrance asked coolly. How does that fit? Wolfe regarded her with a calm that made even me uneasy. Mr. Vickers sought to destroy the physical dossier. Mr. Brackett sought to profit from it. And you, Mrs. Torrance, protected the man who created it. Her chin lifted 1 precise inch. I protected Julius because he feared for his life. Someone had already tried to kill him. I offered refuge. So he is alive, Lydia breathed, tears rising. Yes, madam, Wolfe said gently. Your husband lives. Her sob escaped before she could restrain it. Just then, footsteps approached the office door. Fritz opened it, allowing 2 uniformed officers to step in with a wizened, shaken, soot-stained man between them. Julius Fenn. He looked like he'd crawled out of 2 collapses, one physical, one moral. His hair was grey with ash, his clothes ill-fitting, his eyes bloodshot and darting. Lydia gasped and surged forward, but Wolfe raised a hand. In a moment. The officers placed Fenn into a chair. He exhaled like a man relieved to be indoors. Wolfe leaned in slightly, the closest he came to theatrics. Mr. Fenn, you hid after the fire. I ran, Fenn rasped. I saw the flames, heard shots. I thought they were coming for me. Mrs. Torrance, she took me in, kept me quiet. I didn't know who to trust. Not your wife? Lydia whispered, wounded. I was trying to protect you, he said, voice breaking. Wolfe cleared his throat. Yes, your intentions were noble, though your execution was lamentable. Kramer stepped forward. Fenn, we got questions. You will have answers, Wolfe said, but not until I complete the sequence. He placed his hands flat on the desk, an omen that logic was about to march in straight lines. The Brownstone burned down, Wolfe said, was never about my home. It referred to the political bloc Mr. Fenn intended to expose. Symbolic language, misinterpreted by nearly everyone. Mr. Fenn's dossier threatened to incinerate reputations built on decades of corruption. Lydia bowed her head. Torrance stiffened. Vickers clenched his jaw. The aide looked faint. And so, Wolfe continued, each of you played your part. Fear, greed, ideology, self-preservation. He paused. But only one of you attempted murder. Kramer stepped closer. Which one? Wolfe inhaled deeply, and then he spoke the name. The name struck the room like a bucket of cold water. Vickers lurched half out of his chair, face flushed with fury. That's outrageous. You've concocted some parlour room melodrama, Wolfe, but you have not. Oh, sit down, I told him. You're creasing the carpet. Wolfe didn't blink. Your attempt, Mr. Vickers, began with the fire, but you also dispatched men to recover or silence Mr. Fenn, assuming he had escaped the flames. One carried a handkerchief marked JF, an affected touch meant to deflect suspicion. The idiocy of that ploy nearly rivals its malevolence. Vickers trembled with indignation. This is slander, Kramer snorted. It's evidence, Vickers. You're in it up to your tailored cuffs. Wolfe continued, his voice gaining weight. You orchestrated the arson to obliterate the dossier. But when Brackett attempted to sell portions of it independently, Keller's security chief acted rashly and killed him. Different motives, same nexus, political desperation. The aide sank lower into his seat, staring at his knees. Julius Fenn swallowed hard. I never intended anyone to die. I only wanted the truth out. Torrance finally spoke, her voice like cold silver. And you thought you could expose an entire political structure without provoking predators. Julius, you were naive. Fenn winced. Perhaps, but I believed reforms mattered. Wolfe shifted, addressing her. Madam, your role was complex. You sheltered Mr. Fenn, not to conceal a crime, but to protect a whistleblower who had become the quarry of 2 rival factions, admirable in intent, misguided in execution. Her lips tightened, not disagreement, just distaste at being analysed. Lydia leaned forward tentatively. Julius, why didn't you come home? He looked at her with a weary sorrow. Because they wanted me dead, and because if you were questioned I knew you'd tell the truth. You're too honest to be an accomplice. She covered her mouth, eyes shimmering. Kramer stepped forward, cigar still unlit. All right, Wolfe, you've traced the lines, but you said you'd show motive, sequence, and proof. Let's have the end of it. Wolfe nodded. Gladly. He folded his hands. The reconstructed dossier, thanks to Mrs. Torrance's photostat and Mr. Keller's internal memo, reveals a sustained pattern of coercion, bribery, and quid pro quo arrangements within the Brownstone block. Mr. Fenn compiled it. Mr. Brackett attempted to sell it. Mr. Vickers feared its impact and chose arson. Lies, Vickers rasped. Quiet, Kramer said, not loudly, but with finality. Wolfe went on. After the fire, Mr. Fenn believed danger surrounded him from every angle. He fled. Mrs. Torrance hid him. And Kellaw's security chief, panicked foolish, shot Brackett to stop a leak. The aide whispered. He thought he was protecting the campaign. Phooey, Wolfe said, softly but deadly. Murder is not protection. It is obliteration. He turned his gaze to Kramer. Inspector, the accelerant linkage, the monogrammed handkerchief, the recovered memo, the ballistics match to the security chief's weapon, and Mr. Fenn's own account provide the complete structure. Kramer chewed his cigar. Yeah, he admitted grudgingly. Your structure holds. Damn it, he pointed at Vickers. And we've got enough on you to roast you twice. Vickers surged up again. This is political sabotage. Archie Goodwin, that's me, stepped neatly between him and Wolfe. Careful, chum. If you rush the desk, I charge extra for wrestling. He glared poison at me, but stayed put. Wolfe exhaled, weary of theatrics. Mr. Goodwin, summon the principals. They are mercifully already here. I dislike clutter, Inspector. Kindly proceed. Kramer signalled the uniforms. Vickers, you're under arrest for arson, conspiracy, attempted murder, and anything else the DA can stack. To the aide, your boss's security chief is next. To Torrance and Lydia, your witnesses, don't go far. Torrance rose with a regal poise. Lydia clung to Julius's arm as though rebuilding something fragile. As the officers escorted Vickers out, he snarled at me. You think you've won, Goodwin. You're a pawn. I'm a well-paid pawn, I said, and we get cooler chairs. When the door closed, silence settled again. Fenn exhaled shakily. I owe you both my life. Wolfe frowned. You owe us competence, sir, and honesty. Had you exhibited either earlier, none of this chaos would have occurred. Julius nodded meekly. Lydia whispered, May we go home now? Kramer softened half an inch. We'll take your statements then, yes. Mrs. Torrance paused at the doorway. Mr. Wolfe, despite your tone, your mind remains unmatched. A pity you waste it in this Brownstone. Wolfe gave her a thin smile. Madam, I do not waste it. I preserve it. She inclined her head and left. Kramer lingered, scratching his jaw. All right, Wolfe. This time, you saw the patterns before we did. Hate admitting it. It is no burden, Wolfe said dryly. Yeah, well, Kramer muttered. We'll file charges. Expect follow-up. Of course. Kramer left, shutting the door behind him. The office felt strangely warm. Wolfe leaned back, pressing his fingers together. Archie. Yes, sir? I suppose you expect a reward for your exertions. I was thinking hazard pay, maybe a medal or at least a fruit basket. Nonsense. Your salary suffices, though. He sighed, almost inaudibly. I am gratified you are not seriously harmed. Well, I said, I try to disappoint assassins where possible. Wolfe's eyes closed, a sign he'd had enough living minds for the evening. Confound it. Fritz will bring beer shortly. Bring me the folder with the photostat. I collected the folder from the safe and placed it before him. He opened it with the reverence he usually reserved for a rare orchid bloom. The flames I wish to see now, he murmured, are the ones under Fritz's sauté pan. I grinned. That's our Wolfe. When politics burn down, dinner's still at 8. From the kitchen, Fritz's footsteps approached, the sound of peace returning to the house. And as I switched off the desk lamp, I thought how Manhattan fires, political or literal, might crackle and roar across the city. But somehow, impossibly, they never quite reached us here in the Brownstone.